Empirical evidence is the truth that theory must mimic, not the other way around. So we're going to look at the empirical evidence. By empirical evidence, we mean the evidence that anybody can look at and see. So all of you are capable of knowing what happened. I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to understand it for yourself. And I want you to be empowered to own the information. The towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair. The buildings turned to dust. We don't know a name for that. It needs a new name. I call it dustification. That's building 3. A lot of people overlook that building. That material there is all that was left of that building. And this is the remains of Tower 2, about the lobby size down there. To remind you of how big of a mass was there. And then it is gone. This picture was taken on 9/11. Where is all the debris? Nikola Tesla wanted to give free energy to the world, but was afraid it might be used for evil purposes. Well, been there, done that. Already happened. Here is the Tower 1 turning into dust, frothing up into dust. And you can see it shooting up and out. In controlled demolition, buildings are chopped up into chunks, the chunks slam to the ground, and then there's dust. This is dust before it hits the ground. So why didn't people see this on 9/11? Problem-solving skills, groupthink, or peer pressure. And the third thing is they're terrified of the implications. If they see what happens, oh dear, you know. But that doesn't change the fact that it happened. But we're going to focus on problem solving. I know, the answer is 27. Right. Am I right? What's the question? Before you know if an answer is right or wrong, you have to know what the question is. In this equation here, if you add the 4 and 5 first, and then multiply by 3, you get 27. If you multiply 5 times 3, and then add the 4, you get 19. Maybe we should just add the 2 and we'll get, the average. A lot of folks approach 9/11 that way. If you average everything together, let's say it was this plus this plus this. No, that's not the correct answer. You start out with a theory, get people to focus on all the possibilities that they can think of. Then you have biased data collection, because what happens if it was something else that you didn't foresee? You've already assumed a conclusion. You've already assumed how it happened. How it happened, what's it? So essentially what you're doing is starting out with a theory of how it happened and using that to determine what happened. That's backwards. That's the wrong order. That's a syntax error. Here are some steel beams falling through the air, some of these wheat checks. The outer columns, that's an enormous amount of dust. Turns out that is the steel frothing up and turning to dust as it falls. So here they are falling through the air, trailing an enormous amount of dust. That dust was so dense it blocked out 100% of the sunlight for some period of time. So determining what happened first is important. Then you can determine how it happened, who is involved, why they did it. So focusing on what happened is the most important thing of it all. The towers did not slam to the ground, because if they'd slammed to the ground, several things would have happened. You would have had over 1 million tons of debris piled up there. That didn't happen. Lack of debris. If there was over 1 million tons of debris on the ground, we'd certainly see it. There are the 2 towers. There's building 3. And you go to work in Bankers Trust, about the 20th floor, and you look out the window across the street. What do you see? What are you going to see? Oops. Where'd the building go? Tower 1 is gone. Tower 2 is gone. Where's the material? The main thing of what happened. The towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They turned into dust in midair. All of lower Manhattan would have been flooded because the towers were built in the Hudson River on bedrock 70 feet below the water table with a dike around it. The dike would have been ruptured, flooding all the subway tunnels. That didn't happen. Here's when it was initially built before the WFC buildings were built across the street. There's the bathtub, there's the original shoreline, and they of course wanted more of this real estate in Manhattan, so they built the towers out here with the dike around them. If those towers had slammed down, those would have been busted. As a matter of fact, you know that Building 6 with that hole in the middle? When they went to take down this portion of it, they pulled it down with cables. They didn't want to use explosives because they knew it would damage the wall.
We had to be very careful how we demolished Building 6. We were worried about the Building 6 coming down and then damaging the slurry wall, so we wanted that particular building to fall within a certain area.
There it goes, there it goes.
And if the towers had slammed to the ground, the seismic signals, that measure earthquakes, would have registered that much material slamming to the ground, and that didn't happen. Seismic impact, this is the real smoking gun. One of the first responders said, "I don't remember the sound of a building hitting the ground. Somebody told me that it was measured on the Richter scale. I don't know how true that is. If the building's hitting the ground that hard, well, I don't remember the sound of it." All right, this is from earlier that year. There was an earthquake in Midtown Manhattan. So let's look at the signal the towers made. The ground shook for 8 seconds. Notice there's no other signal prior to this one, and the waves are very wide spacing. In a typical earthquake, you first get the P wave. The primary wave arrives, and then the secondary wave arrives. Notice the spacing. They're much closer together than these signals. This one does not reflect a P wave or an S wave. The seismic signal did not travel through the earth. There were only surface waves. But the difference in the timing of the P wave and S wave arrival tells you how far away the epicenter is, because those two waves travel at different speeds through the earth. And it's only 8 seconds. It takes 9.5 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the pavement below. Houston, we have a problem. Tower 1, that's its demise. And then all afternoon, there's these quarry blasts that were recorded. That's from the Fox Islands, which is part of the Aleutian Islands. They had a little earthquake up there. But there's a equivalent of 0.6 on the Richter scale for Building 7, which is this little line here. It was a non-seismic event. Building 7 went away and didn't make a seismic event that you could register on this chart. Where's the signal for Building 7? Now we're going to look out the other direction, over Building 4, and see what that looks like. The north wing of Building 4 is still there, but the main body is missing. That's weird. That's when it often gets forgotten. The north wing of it seemed to be sliced off like with an X-Acto knife, and the main body of the building just went missing. Where'd it go? Mind you, that was also the location where the top of Tower 2 was tipping over and then it turned to dust. That's where it would have fallen. If the top 35 floors of Tower 2 had fallen to the ground, landed on Building 4, would it have looked like that? This is a top view of the various towers, buildings, showing you where the holes were. Weird holes. Here is the main part of Building 4 that's gone missing. You have holes in the streets, including Vesey Street, and this huge hole in Building 6. Looks like a lot of smaller holes, like a post hole digger dug it out. It was announced 6 different times at least that One Liberty Plaza was collapsing. It's still standing. It became a running joke.
Because of that One Liberty Plaza building, which is just to the east of the World Trade Center complex. We have talked to rescue workers who tell us they saw the building starting to twist and then said they saw some windows starting to break.
Well, we are seeing the windows breaking from where we're standing. We could see the windows falling out or facing falling out.
Now, we are told that some 100 buildings in the surrounding area have been damaged. There was a report last night that a 54-story building was about to collapse. We have now confirmed through the building management of that building that is not true.
There we are. There's an ambulance. You see, I hope you can see the north wall and the south wall. Where's the building? You see the north wall and the south wall, and there's virtually nothing in between. This ambulance doesn't look clobbered. No crunched in marks. You don't see steel beams on the ground, just this aluminum cladding that was a decorative type material. There's some steel wheat checks here stabbed into the pavement off the picture, but there really is very little steel. A 110-story building just went missing. This was from a news report the day after.
Office is down in Lower Manhattan today, George. Jackie, Judd, and several other people keep asking us, where did all the rubble go?
If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlitzky, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was pulverized.
You know, kind of silly there. I don't mean to pick on him. He's doing the best he can. What he's telling us is that there's virtually no building left. Here's a map of what was left. And let's focus at that point there, the base of Tower 1. 14 people walked out. 14 people walked out of here, too. That little stub at the base of Tower 3. They were right down here at the base of Tower 1. 110-story building went away. And they weren't crushed. Jay Jonas, one of the firefighters trapped in there, said, I looked and said, guys, there used to be 106 floors above us, and now I'm seeing sunshine. There's nothing above us. Those big buildings don't exist. And he later said, these were the biggest office buildings in the world, and I didn't see one desk, one chair, one phone, nothing.
The collapse of the North Tower created a massive rush of air. The 110-story tower disintegrated in just 10 seconds.
They were debating if the towers collapse. They called it collapsing.
The collapse of the North Tower created a massive rush of air. The 110-story tower disintegrated in just 10 seconds. The collapse of the North Tower created a massive rush of air. The 110-story tower disintegrated in just 10 seconds.
In controlled demolition, buildings are chopped up into chunks, the chunks slam to the ground, and then there's dust. This is dust before it hits the ground. The Seattle Kingdom was a controlled demolition. Notice that the dust doesn't rise much above the highest point of the building. For Building 7, which is this little line here, it was a non-seismic event. Building 7 went away and didn't make a seismic event that you could register on this chart. Well, here's a controlled demolition, the Seattle Kingdom. March 26, 2000. The P wave arrives at the seismic station and the S wave arrives at the seismic station. See how closely spaced that signal is. It takes 4 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the roof of the kingdom, just to give you relative size. Yet the ground shook for at least 9 seconds in the major part, so at least twice as long instead of less. Here are other signals. There are 5 different recording stations for Building 7. None of them could see an S wave or a P wave. They calculated when it should have arrived. The 6.4 is the time it takes to drop a bowling ball off the roof. The surface wave lasted for less time. And actually, one of those stations, they couldn't even find a surface wave arriving. Where's the signal for Building 7? When NIST was having a meeting about trying to figure out what happened to Building 7, they were debating if the tower's collapse, they called it collapsing, could have damaged the piping underground, and decided it couldn't.
I thought the seismic data you were going to look at was data associated with the collapse of the tower, particularly 2.
The signal's strength due to the collapse of the towers were not of any magnitude that was seismically significant from an earthquake design standpoint, or from the design or failure of a structural component, or of, I would say, a piping system that might be used in a structure. So there wasn't anything that gave us pause in terms of that being a significant seismic event.
So what's going on here? No S wave, no P wave. Those 2 waves travel through the earth. This didn't slam to the ground. No big building slammed to the ground. Let's look at the possibilities. Tower 2 is the first tower to go away. If you turned all but the bottom 16 stories to dust and just dropped a 16-story building to the ground, it would make the seismic signal approximately that was recorded, which was a 2.1. Do the same thing for Tower 1. Dustify all but the bottom 20 stories, and you get the seismic signal that was recorded. And Building 7, if you turn all but the bottom 2.5 stories to dust, it would make the seismic signal approximately the same as what was recorded. This is compared to the Seattle Kingdom. The Seattle Kingdom was really just this concrete ring, and it made a 2.3. As we saw before, the building is turning to dust as it falls. Building turned to dust. I don't think anyone can deny that. Many folks see these squirts out each of the faces at regular intervals and say, oh, those are squibs. Well, what I'd like to ask is why there isn't more stuff squirting out. If you turn the building to dust, if you have all these water tanks in the building, those are pressure vessels. When the walls of those begin to dissolve or weaken, at some point it's going to cut loose. And it's going to squirt water out. To me, that's what those look like. If you're getting this building to the ground in 9.5 seconds, that stuff's got to shoot elsewhere. The average speed it needs to shoot out is Mach 1.4. And the material from in the middle of the building outward, Mach 2.5. That should look like all the buildings adjacent to it have been machine gun fired. They didn't look like that. And if the building had been wired up with bombs, you ever see these signs? Turn off two-way radios and cell phones, because they can cause explosives to be set off if you're going by like a rock quarry. But people think they heard explosions. Well, yeah, bombs do go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb. These Scott tanks, those are the air tanks the firefighters wear when they're in smoky environments so that they can breathe. They have extra Scott tanks they carry on their fire trucks. Those are exploding at ground level.
Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
The 4-1 should have taken
Many of them talked about that, these Scott tanks. There's various testimony, but one in particular that I'd like to read. Vehicle 219 destroyed. Was it on fire? What? Was it on fire? Fire, we saw the sucker blow up. It went boom. His vehicle just exploded. This is real dustification you're going to see here. That's the corner of Vesey Street and West Street. Yeah, you see this like a stick. Keep watching it. It turns to dust. Yep, we will see it. See it there? You know, this one we replay a few times. Here it comes. And if we look at the intersection right below that, right by the Verizon building, you'll see there's a piece of aluminum cladding there, but you don't see any steel. That steel that we're watching does not hit the ground. Now we're going to watch another dustification. The building goes away and there's a few columns left standing. I believe those are the top of stairwell B. Core columns, and watch, they'll turn to dust. They'll faint into dust. And this is building 7 over here, so we can see that's well above building 7. That's like 700 feet tall. And here it goes, it just faints into dust. My detractors like to say that the columns fell over and the dust was so fine that it hung in the air. Well, if it was so fine that it hung in the air, why didn't we see it? Why did it settle on the columns to begin with, on the vertical columns? Doesn't make sense. And here's a closer view, and then it starts to drop down and kind of faints, turns to dust. Now, if that thing tipped over, it would take out a few blocks worth of buildings. How's it going to go straight down? You got a 700-foot hole in the ground dropping into? Again, if the dust is so fine that it hangs in the air, how did it settle on those columns? And another view. So there's no dust hanging around the outside of those columns, but we have dust shooting downward there. You can even see some wiring hanging out. How does it become fuzzy like that? Other than it's turning to dust. And there are other images where you have columns here that go away by the second image as it gets lower to the ground, which is over building 3. As the building's standing still, one face and one face only has opaque dust pouring out of it. I call that lather. Now this is the north face of building 7 on a day when you had a light breeze, very light breeze, about 7 miles per hour, 8 plus or minus 1 mile per hour. Just a light breeze. These windows are broken. If that's smoke, why is it one face only from ground to roof? And also, why is it not coming out those broken windows? If there's a traffic jam, wouldn't you think it would want to come out there? Dust roll out. The dust cloud is like a straight wall. It's chasing these guys down the street. It isn't hot because it overtakes them and leaves them covered with dust. And this woman in the middle, she's not cooked by dust. Now, dust is going to get kicked up, but how can this fine of dust be settled out of the air? Because this is nice and clear down to here. The dust rolled out a certain distance and then went up. Bob and Bree, who lived here, videotaped it. It rolled out towards their apartment, but never touched their windows. It's amazing. This is 2 still shots of their video, and we're going to watch that video. It didn't quite touch their window and went up. Never touched their window, like within an inch or 2. And then it rose up like rising yeast bread. But that dust went up, or whatever it was. Those fumes, I call it fumes just generically, like it was on a mission to go up. Almost looks like a funnel cloud. Dark stuff went westward. The whitish stuff went south and up to a certain altitude and then sort of wafts away. This is about 6 weeks later. Notice they have misting going on. The dirt, how'd that dirt get there? What is this? Fumes coming up from the wet dirt. Now what I mean by toasted cars, they're toast. Their history. I'm not implying that they're burned. This abrupt boundary, take a closer look. Totally toasted in the front, nice showroom kind of quality in the back, like it's got a new wax job. That's where most of the toasted cars were.
You said you saw melted tour buses, melted cars?
The cars that were right down there, it was just unbelievable. They were twisted and melted into nothing. The debris is just unbelievable. And then you can see fire trucks and police vehicles that were down there early that all their windows, the windshields are completely blown out.
So here's a comparison. This one that has this nice, clean look, and from a regular car fire, you get these burn lines. Burnt cars usually have scraps of glass left in the corner.
At least you have some remnants. You have literally an engine that is melded together with other parts of the car. Look across the street there. You've got a Con Ed truck. That truck, too, in terrible shape.
The stuffing of a burnt car usually has something left in it, where the toasted cars is nothing whatsoever left in. I think that's trash that was tossed in later.
Car after car after car, buses completely obliterated and burned straight down to the steel.
Where are the scorch marks on this bus? If it were on fire, regular conventional fire, wouldn't you see, charred marks or something? Note the missing door handles and missing windows. Here's the toasted car park. My detractors like to say toasted cars don't count because they're towed. Well, it doesn't matter if they're towed, they're still weird toasting patterns. Here they are, while they're being toasted. You see the apparent flames. Unburned paper in between. That's the perspective. And they're not toasted yet. And here they are a little bit closer. People evacuating the area. There it is, toasted. Can you tell what color it had been? Just totally toast. Patrick Connolly, firefighter, went into building 7 in the side door here. He didn't like the looks of it in there, didn't think he'd be safe, so he came out. This was right about the time that one of the towers turned to dust. When he comes out, he can't see anything, and then he says, thank goodness the car went into spontaneous combustion, because then he could see where he was. The cars were lighting up as he passed them. And note, this is after the tower was destroyed. During the cleanup, here's some apparent spontaneous combustion. Here's the firemen going for lunch. Ho-hum. They're not concerned about a car exploding. Engines weren't exploding. Notice the unburned paper all over the place. The paper wasn't burning. Weird. Actually, some of them said that initially water had no effect on the car fires. Hot steel-toed boots melting? Does that make sense?
Steel-toed boots.
Steel-toed boots. Out, still on the rubble. It's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees.
Does it make sense that these guys are walking around on a grill that's 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit?
The guy's boots just melt within a few hours, and they're burning their feet.
There were no reports of burned feet, but at a minimum, if my steel oven is melting, the turkey inside is more than well done. Something weird is going on with boots. Boots are coming apart. They're disintegrating. Why? A lot of people have seen this image saying, it's proof of heat. So this point E, they say it's 819 Fahrenheit. There's a lake there. A water main broke, filled the street with water. And this guy's even walking around in knee-deep water. He doesn't look like a boiled chicken. Water boils at 212 Fahrenheit. So that's not hot. This might be something else, some other interesting energy signal.
You have the videotapes, the firefighters reporting molten metal like a slurry or a steel mill or a volcano. Those are quotes. Giant pools.
What about the pictures of them dragging oxygen hoses all over the steaming supposed hot metal? If it were that hot, you wouldn't dare do that, would you?
Well, we do have the infrared photos of the molten metal.
Well, again, what melted the metal? Was it heat?
So rolled up carpets. Here's what these columns should bend like if they were overloaded. Or if a really fast, hard force came down, a pile driver, you'd get a bowing out. That didn't happen. Here's what happened. Here's one of those sets of wheat checks. They're curled around the vertical axis. I'd say that looks more like a rolled up carpet. And that looks more like lasagna noodle. How do you load a beam like that to get it to curl? More curling and over curling. How do you curl a beam more than 180 degrees? And how do you curl it without making any cracks in around those bends? This was in Baker's Trust, which was across the street from Tower 2. That's pretty weird. How do you get it to bend like that or wrinkle up? Looks like a curling ribbon. If you get a beam to buckle, that's one mode. Here's another mode. It sure doesn't do that. So we're going to talk about the weather. About 10 minutes to 15 minutes before the events of 9/11 began, this is what the weather chart looked like as aired. There's something missing there. The day before, here's this Category 3 hurricane aiming straight for Manhattan. And Geraldo Rivera, who brags on knowing all hurricanes, didn't know it was there.
You know, and it's one funny thing I think of if only a hurricane had come on 9/11. Remember, they didn't know how to use instruments, the terrorists. They took off in Boston, and they literally, after they took over the aircraft, they steered by line of sight. And it was that crystal clear September day.
Sure was. Beautiful.
And if it were only one of these weather days, history would have been rewritten. And I think about that a lot.
For 4 days, it was going straight towards New York City. That hurricane was the longest-lived hurricane of the season, the first major hurricane of the season. Leading up to 9/11, it went in a straight line to New York City, then turned around that afternoon and started heading out of town. Kind of weird that we didn't hear about it. I superimposed where the hurricane was at that moment, but this is what was shown, no hurricanes. Remember, the high-pressure system was moving in, the high-pressure system there, and when the hurricane moved in, that's low-pressure system, it started back down. Guess where it was a peak? That shows that the two weather systems met over Manhattan. The North Tower gets its hold. Just before that, they wandered off from the average. And then the South Tower gets its hold, and they go horizontally. Then both towers go away, and it's haywire all afternoon until Building 7 goes away. It's almost back to normal. Just a coincidence? John Hutchison could reproduce every one of the effects we saw at the World Trade Center. This is the work of John Hutchison. This metal is not kinked, not buckled, smooth curvature. This is a solid block of iron, 2 inches by 2 inches by 7 inches, and it crumples up. Also, it fumes, and I compare it with WTC fuming of a door handle. Weird fires? Here's John Hutchison's boat experiment. When the gizmo is turned off, the water's calm. That's when it ignites. Just like when the cars lit up, it was after the tower's demise. The water is calm, boat lights up. The top two are from the WTC, the bottom two are John Hutchison's work. And this video's kind of unique. You can see the solid bar of steel wiggling on the table. There's another one where it does sit-ups. He plugs this into a regular wall outlet. What he does is create a static field, and within the static field, he interferes radio frequency signals, like microwave. And here, watch this flat piece of steel. Right in this area, it starts to come apart. I can't tell you what caused this because I'm not the one who ran the equipment, but I can show you something that can replicate all of the effects we've seen. Here's these columns we saw at the World Trade Center. This is what someone has done in their lab. In hurricanes, you had 2 before through tree, straw through trees. John Hutchison has a sample of a knife in aluminum. At the WTC, you have this peeling effect on the cars. I didn't know what that meant until I saw John Hutchison's aluminum samples that are peeled up. WTC file cabinet, coins aren't melted. That's not melted from heat. This wood, this is John Hutchison's sample, wood embedded in aluminum. If the aluminum was hot enough to melt, if it was melting because of heat, the wood would be burned.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
So the aluminum melted for a different reason, or they fused together from something different. Rounded holes in Building 6, rounded holes in Hutchison samples, as though it's just something in space around a line dustifies material.
One of the most intriguing discoveries in modern science is the fact that there is nothing in this world that even approaches what might be called truly solid. We speak of solids, liquids, and gases, but these terms describe superficial rather than basic properties of matter. All matter, regardless of its state, is composed of invisible particles called atoms, which in turn are composed of other particles. The air we breathe, though invisible to us, is just as real as wood or metal, because it's made of the same fundamental particles. It is the arrangement of these particles and the forces that bind them together that give to a substance its special properties. If we bring a piece of steel close to a magnet, we say that the steel becomes magnetized. But what is it that actually happens? If we place the steel inside a coil of wire connected to a high-gain amplifier, and then bring the magnet close to the bar of steel, we can hear something that suggests movement inside the steel. Listen. We think of a piece of steel as being solid, and according to our definition, it is a solid. But the popular concept of what makes a solid is certainly a false one. This piece of steel, and any so-called solid substance on this earth, is almost entirely empty space. If we could eliminate the empty space in this piece of steel, all that would remain would be a tiny bit of matter, so small as to be invisible even with a high-power microscope. This concept of almost unlimited empty space within matter is comparatively new, but it is the very cornerstone of our knowledge in this atomic age. Atoms are not solid. Instead, they are tiny solar systems composed of infinitely small particles revolving at tremendous speeds and bound together by enormous forces. And like our solar system, atoms are almost entirely empty space. For the moment, let's forget the forces within the atom. Thinking only of the particles and the empty space around them, science knows no reason why I couldn't take this so-called solid steel bottle and just throw it right on through that wall. Except this, we've tried it and it hasn't worked. If I were to attempt to run through that wall right now, all I'd get for my trouble would be a good-sized lump on the head. But that which would prevent my body passing through the wall would not be a collision of particles, but rather a collision of forces, the same forces that make an atom bomb. And if it were not for these forces, my body could go freely back and forth through that wall, just as though it were not there. It is within the realm of scientific possibility that there could be two worlds coexistent, occupying the same part of space at the same moment of time, each world just as real as the other, with its mountains, valleys, rivers, trees, and people. And that one world could pass freely through the other world, neither world being conscious of the existence of the other world, if you grant just one thing. Atomic forces within the material substance of these two worlds that are not mutually interactive. What do we mean by this? Let's see. Here are two pieces of steel. Their appearance is quite similar, but a magnet will reveal a basic internal difference between the two pieces. This one, of course, is picked up, but this one is unaffected. This piece of steel is non-magnetic, stainless steel. Of course, we all know that other metals, such as brass or aluminum, are not affected by the magnet. But a ring made of aluminum is something else. It can be suspended in air by the electromagnetic force of what is actually a transformer. The ring being in effect a one-turn shorted secondary. A smaller ring will react even more violently. Here is another ring. This one made of a material we say is non-conductive. And it is completely unaffected. Here is another example. Several thousand watts of power were involved in that spark. If we replace the spark gap with a copper coil, the same power now flows through the coil. It's invisible, has no effect on many substances, but it can generate a lot of heat. Wood, paper, things that we think of as being quite inflammable are not affected at all. However, a piece of steel wool bursts into flame instantly. Did you ever fry an egg on a cold stove? It's no trick at all if you have the right equipment. This is a cold hot plate, and because it's cold, you can make it out of wood, if you like. Just be sure that there's a coil of wire inside and that you connect that coil to a high voltage alternating current source. The rest is easy. As long as we're being different, we'll use motor oil instead of Crisco. The egg fries very quickly, but the stove remains perfectly cold. In fact, if you wish to keep it handy, you can fry your egg on the morning newspaper. With a gadget like this, you can get up in the morning, sit on the stove, read the morning newspaper, and fry the eggs in your lap. Another example of the fact that physical forces can be quite selective in their effect. All of the examples which we have cited thus far have been in the physical realm, and of course have been limited by that fact. We can, however, cite examples that transcend the purely physical and clearly demonstrate the reality of these two worlds.
It looks like a desk lamp is cool to the touch and appears to be doing nothing until it comes into contact with water. 92-year-old former Spitfire pilot Peter Davey claims his invention uses the power of sound to boil water.
Nobody really knows how it works.
Davey believes high-frequency sonic vibrations emitted from within the silver bulb cause the water to boil. He says the idea came to him 50 years ago when he noticed different saxophone notes caused different household items to rattle. The mains-powered gizmo has experts intrigued.
Never seen anything like it in my life, as they say.
I'm careful that I don't divulge everything. I'm waiting to get a manufacturer that's prepared to put some money into it.
And if he does get it on the shelves, he's already got one interested customer.
If I saw one in a shop, I'd buy one, because I think they're interesting little bit of technology. However it is they work,
But for now, Davey is savouring his gizmo's success and sticking to his own unique theory on how it works. Beverly Lockhart, 3 News.
What we've essentially tried to show, particularly in the last section, that what happened on 9/11 is very much similar to what John Hutchison did in experiments.
Here we have a collection of samples from 1979 to 1989 of metal pieces done by the Hutchison effect apparatus. And we're going to start with the very first sample, which gained a lot of history around the world and also in a lot of national laboratories, which is this very large, heavy steel bar. As you can see here, the crumbling material here is off the end of this bar here. And actually it's a transmuted material that is unknown in the metallurgical handbooks. And this particular sample has been to Germany, in the United States National Laboratories, also in Japan and other locations, and extremely rare material that appears to be a major transmutation. Now, getting into another sample here, we find a heavy piece of what they call extruded brass that exploded with inside itself, ripping it into this pattern here, ripping it apart. Coming to this sample here of aluminum, we find that something wanted to get outside of the metal itself, and looking at it, you can see that the pressures inside of it indeed tried to get out. And going to samples that have other samples sitting on top of them. Well, that's a stainless steel kitchen knife embedded in a piece of extruded alloy. We get to a piece of, again, extrusion with a piece of wood inside, wood mixed in with the structure itself. And coming to other samples, we find, again, samples that have ripped themselves apart and rejoined, as you can see in this little sample here. And then we come to breaks that indicate actually a lot of stress, as it's a nice clean cut and looks like a bent stress. So this is broken in a fashion perhaps like that. And then on the other side of the coin we come to something that looks like it was ripped apart or turned to jelly and ripped apart and frozen in time and space. This large aluminum sample, again extrusion alloy, was once one piece and was totally formed like this after some experiments, actually seen on video. We come to more hard materials such as stainless steel that have just bent and twisted around with a lot of little pot marks and pieces falling out of it. Again, similar to the large piece of steel that I just mentioned, for being the very first sample. And this is just many samples that I do have and that other people do have that still are undergoing analysis around the world.
The structure of a hurricane is much like a Tesla coil. Now watch what happens in a tornado as well. Here's some flying trucks.
They look like Tonka trucks being thrown through the air right there.
Semi, the trailers, there you go. A couple of semi, look at that. We saw trees, there goes another semi.
And it's spinning.
It's spinning, down it comes, bang, lands on its nose right down at the ground.
Levitation from a natural source. So this shows that there's a type of physics we didn't learn about in school, but it exists in nature. What happened on 9/11, there's no doubt that it was some kind of classified technology. And by definition, classified technology is not in the public domain. This is the dawn of a new age. Somebody has, in their abilities, a method to direct energy to disrupt the molecular basis of matter. Instead of molecules being attracted to each other, they repel each other.
The next part of this presentation is about something called tritium, and we found that this has become a very important factor, and Dr. Wood has collected a lot of data about tritium. But basically what we're looking at is nuclear effects. We believe that the effects of these weird fires, it's some type of odd nuclear effect, and it's related to something called cold fusion, which should more correctly be termed low energy nuclear reactions.
The first thing was this thing called tritium, which is a sub-form of hydrogen which should not exist except in extremely tiny quantities. We found that by working these cells of Fleischmann and Pons containing lithium hydroxide and deuterium oxide, that we could produce this tritium in great abundance.
Back at Texas A&M, Bockris's group found themselves under attack. Science magazine writer Gary Taubes wrote a stinging article that insinuated that someone in the group had spiked the samples with tritium. Although unfounded and eventually proved untrue, the allegation effectively dampened Bockris's remarkable claims. Yet as early as 1992, cold fusion experimenters began reporting unusual appearances of trace amounts of different metals. Rechecking for possible contamination, scientists like Bockris and Miley confirmed that indeed new metals and isotopes were being formed, transmuted, during the process which produces excess heat.
But I think the main part was that I had done work which was against the paradigm, and that was what they were really upset about. The people had laughed at it and said, "What the heck are you doing, trying to disprove the laws of nuclear physics?" And of course, that's exactly what we were doing, and succeeding, you see. You know, there's that dreadful word alchemy, which we mustn't use, but it was a form of that in a way. It was creating new metals, you see.
Now, some of you in this room may be familiar with Stephen E. Jones, and he produced this paper a few years ago in 2005 talking about the use of thermite at the World Trade Center. Stephen E. Jones actually worked on cold fusion, and he helped to discredit cold fusion, which is also a nuclear phenomenon. It's an energy phenomenon, and where this is all leading us to is that this is an energy phenomenon which underlies what happened to the World Trade Center.
Now we get to the most exciting slide. This is from leaky nuke plants, what they pollute into the waterways. The amount of tritium, this is exponential, logarithmic actually, and it's a very high number. This is what is produced in the cell with cold fusion. This is what was found in the basement of WTC-6, you know, the one with all the cylindrical cutouts in it. And this is normal background. What I use the Great Lakes for normal background. Here are some relative numbers. If compared to what was measured at the World Trade Center in terms of tritium, the background levels are 1/50th. What was measured with cold fusion is 50 times that, but that was in a cell. Keep in mind, the World Trade Center had fire hoses on it. You know, the hurricane rained on it. It was diluted down somewhat. Leaky nuclear plants have 18,000 times that. What was measured at the World Trade Center was definitely above background levels. This is from 1989. Science by press conference. This
is it a
Steve
shortcut
Jones.
to fusion energy? I don't want to disappoint anyone. I think I'll read my lips answer here, and then I'll carry on. I think that'll become clear why I'm saying that. Can you read my lips on that back in the back? It says no.
Don't go there, don't research there. But then he calls for a vote, and he holds up his hand. Let's vote to destroy the careers of Pons and Fleischmann, and vote that it's not science. And these guys are thinking about raising their hand. And peer pressure causes people to do things like this too. If everyone else holds their hand up, you start holding your hand up. You don't want to be caught not holding your hand up. Now, there were folks who somehow believed that thermite had something to do with it.
But we know, and this was already totally clear before we started investigating the dust, that both explosives and incendiaries were used in the controlled demolition of World Trade Center.
What a pile of shit.
There are many indications of the nature of the collapse that are rather stunning. There's a tremendous amount of steel girders that are thrown outwards. You can see a lot of them here in the dust and debris cloud. This concrete was turned into very fine dust, which required a tremendous amount of greater amount of explosives. And if you look at the film footage of the explosions, you find all over the place there's these little plumes of smoke breaking out called spools that are symptomatic of a controlled demolition. Most of the steel was in 30-foot segments, which made it very easy to load aboard vehicles.
Can you smell that? What is that? Sheep, is it? It's cows? No, I know what it is. It's bullshit.
In fact, the evidence shows very strongly that there were explosives used in the way the buildings came down. Measured energy released with known nanothermite. What are these tons of explosives doing in there? Unless somebody really wanted those buildings to come down. Your explanation has to fit the data. I was amazed. It follows. And I'd looked now at dozens of demolitions just to see what they look like, what is the nature, is experiments on how you bring a building down symmetrically, straight down and rapidly. You knock out the core first, the core goes down, the sidewalls lean in a little bit, then the building comes down rapidly because you've knocked out the support. Well, that's exactly how Building 7 came down.
That is one big pile of shit.
We are a group of 2,200 architects and engineers, a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding out what really happened at the World Trade Center. They present the evidence for the explosive demolition. What we see, what FEMA documents, is molten iron. In fact, molten concrete as well, which takes 3,000 degrees of temperature. Where does that come from? It can only come from thermite and incendiary. So the evidence is there for thermite.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
I hope you're proud of yourself, because what you've done is proved without a shadow of a doubt you are the world's dumbest son of a bitch.
Somebody in the world, somewhere, has got access to different technology. Okay? So this is huge. It's probably this. There isn't an issue on the planet that this doesn't affect. It's the biggest thing on the planet, and it's needed the biggest cover-up. I got involved with a group called Scholars for 9/11 Truth, and I've written a book about partly my involvement with that, and I discovered that the Scholars for 9/11 Truth, which Dr. Wood was also a member of for a time being, that's essentially how we came into contact. That was an intelligence gathering operation, and it was part of the cover-up, and that's what I've written about in my book. And such is the extent of this cover-up that when Dr. Wood submitted her Ketam case, which was the court submission of what you've seen tonight, a new group was formed called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and that was headed up by somebody called Richard Gage. He said that Dr. Wood ignores the evidence of thermite, and you've seen in the presentation that that's not true. And he said if she is going to ignore all of that evidence, then she's not practicing science, she's practicing witchcraft. So why is this Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth group going round, the leader going round saying stuff like that? And that's a very important point I want to make. This is not a theory. Not a theory. It is not a theory. This is what actually happened. What you've seen tonight is what actually happened. It's not a theory. Okay? You go onto the internet, Judy Wood's theory, Judy Wood's hypothesis. It's not a theory. It's a catalogue of evidence which shows you what happened. And by looking at what happened, you can work out what caused it.
Do you know anything about the HARP project?
And could this not be the HARP project?
We always get this question.
That has a focused energy beam,
Thank you.
which we know they can cause.
Thank you for asking that. What my term for HARP is high amplitude advancement of real propaganda. See, we're told about this HARP project, but what happened on 9/11, there's no doubt that it was some kind of classified technology. And by definition, classified technology is not in the public domain. So there's no way we would know a name for whatever it was that was used. But HARP is often used for a type of name dropping. It's another bin Laden. With cold fusion, you get transmutation, which you also get in John Hutchison's work. We had transmutation, that's one element changing to another or material changing its material properties. I dropped a hint of that earlier about vehicles rusting very quickly. And there's tritium measured at the World Trade Center. Tritium doesn't happen by a chemical reaction or by any kind of typical normal process. It's a nuclear process that causes that. And there was tritium found, it was 50 times background levels. So it wasn't insignificant.
Again, we really appreciate the value of this.
Where did the towers go? Away with the breeze that blows. And how much steel did they find? Could it be shipped in time? I don't know, I haven't seen the receipt, but it doesn't make sense to me. All those cars in a line, door handles and engines gone. I'd tell you if I could, but you need to ask Judy Wood. Before you accuse someone, you better make damn sure you know what was done. Where you come, this is your alarm. Where you come, so while you're sitting on the fence, why don't you check the evidence? I'll tell you something that you'll learn. World Trade Center
nor did they slam to the ground. They turned into dust in midair.